The Anbernic RG40XXH was one of the first landscape handheld devices that I ever bought. As I mentioned in my previous video of my full breakdown of the device, it's very sleek. It's small enough to fit in my hand and in my pocket. It's a really awesome portable handheld for the retro gaming enthusiast. Researching competitors to this handheld, I came across the TrimUI Smart Pro. Now, the TrimUI is an actually cheaper alternative to the RG40XXH with a bigger screen and just a bigger overall body. The screen on the RG40XXH is a 4-inch screen. It says it's a 4.0-inch IPS screen, OCA full animation, resolution 640 by 480. Now this has a dual-core G31 MP2 GPU and an 8700 quad-core ARM Cortex A53 CPU. The TrimUI Smart Pro has a 4.96-inch IPS fully laminated screen, also 640 by 480, and it has an all-winner A133P 1.8 gigahertz quad core. The GPU on the Smart Pro is the PowerVR GE8300 GPU at 660 megahertz. They're pretty similar devices, but as you'll find, the GPU and the CPU is a little bit better on the TrimUI Smart Pro. Just by looking at them, you can tell that the screen is bigger on the TrimUI Smart Pro than it is on the RG40XXH. But all in all, I really think that portion of it boils down to what you prefer and how you're going to be gaming. Now, in my opinion, I've found that both of them run all of the old retro consoles pretty well, from NES to SNES to Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Sega Genesis, etc. They're all very good at running those and look great on both devices. I will say that there are certain times where the RG40XXH's screen does not compare even to the RG35XX, but with settings changes within RetroArch, you can get it to be pretty close to even. Now, I'll also say that with the bigger screen on the TrimUI Smart Pro, those older games that are in 3:2 resolution will be the same size on both devices. On the TrimUI Smart Pro, it will have an outline depending on what overlay you use. But they look great on either one. And you'll see a comparison here between both devices playing Pokemon Emerald. Now I want to talk about how I utilize these devices. So I've said before in previous videos, the best way to utilize these devices and get the most out of them is through custom firmware. Technically speaking, the RG40XXH has more options for custom firmware compared to the TrimUI Smart Pro, but it's not much of a difference. In fact, I'd be willing to say that the only difference is that most of the TrimUI Smart Pro custom firmwares are in beta state, while a lot of the custom firmwares for the RG40XXH are official releases. I'll say that out of the box, the TrimUI Smart Pro had a lot more features. Really, what we're here for is not necessarily the features per se, but more so what games work on the device. And before we move off of the screen, I do want to point out, in order to utilize your screen, you need to have a way to set your screen to how you like it. The TrimUI Smart Pro blows the RG40XXH out of the water in that regard. We're able to change contrast, brightness, exposure, saturation, all from the settings of the device. And even with a custom firmware on the RG40XXH, you only have access to saturation, temperature, color for the screen on the Anbernic device. Now, not a huge deal, because honestly, I think a lot of the avid gamers won't necessarily worry too much about custom settings for the screen, but I think it's worth noting that the TrimUI allows you to customize the device for really any situation. It's a really good thing. So let's talk about the custom firmwares I'm using, because it is important in terms of what we're going to get out of the device. For the RG40XXH, I am using MuOS or MuOS. While it might be a little bit more of a task to get it installed on the device, I 100% say that it's worth it because of what you can do with it. MuOS is currently in its beta stage. However, they're pretty close to having an official release here in the next coming month. I also want to mention that MuOS, the developers are always willing to help you out with any issues. And in fact, their official Discord has a bunch of channels in regards to test OSs for particular devices. So if you do choose to go with MuOS, please make sure that you support the devs and also utilize their help as much as you can. They're very open to helping. Now with MuOS on the RG40XXH, you get a plethora of tools that I'm not really going to go deep into because I did that on my breakdown video of the device. You can use a USB-C port to go ahead and transfer or go through files on the device directly without taking out the SD card. It's really great for being able to transfer over new ROMs, applications, doing updates. All that stuff is really cool. Also with MuOS, you're able to utilize PortMaster, which is the biggest thing here. Now you're going to see on your screen with PortMaster, I'm able to play games like Half-Life, Stardew Valley, Sonic 2, Sonic 3. You can even utilize the device to play Grand Theft Auto Vice City on the device through PortMaster. Having these custom firmwares is essential to get the most out of these devices. With the TrimUI Smart Pro, I also have installed CrossMix OS. Now, unlike MuOS, this is actually just a build on top of the stock OS for the device. MuOS is a completely different OS that takes over or is in place of the stock OS. CrossMix builds on top of the stock OS. With this, I get things like OTA update, which allows me to be able to update the firmware over the internet without taking the SD card out. It automatically updates at a click of a button and you're good to go. The other thing that I love about CrossMix OS is the extra settings it provides. I'm not going to go too deep into this either because I did that on my breakdown of this device, but essentially a lot of the stuff it adds really unlocks this device to its full potential. Now I want to kind of do a comparison of the power of both devices, and this is kind of where we're going to see the biggest difference. Now I want to reiterate here, both these devices I bought through a third-party website. I got the RG40XXH for about $70, and the TrimUI Smart Pro was on a huge sale, and I got it for $49. Really good price points for these devices, honestly. But the price point for the TrimUI Smart Pro specifically is very, very surprising considering what it can do. So let's boot up here a PSP game, and we're going to play God of War here on PSP on the RG40XXH, and we'll see how it runs. Now, at first boot, you're going to find that the cutscenes already are about right around 15 frames per second. Not ideal for this, but when we get into gameplay, even after some settings switches and changes, I was only able to get a max of 22 frames per second. It drops as low as 15 frames per second. Now, ideally for these, 25 is probably right around where you want to be. 30 is ideal, but 25 is still playable. Unfortunately, on this RG40XXH, I have yet to find a way to get God of War specifically to be playable on this device. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other PSP games you can play, but every single one that I want to play will not be playable. Specifically, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, this God of War game, as well as GTA San Andreas Stories. Now, I will say San Andreas a little bit more functional and probably playable, but when I have the other device that can play it much better, I don't see a point in playing it on the RG40XXH. And here's a look at God of War on the TrimUI Smart Pro. Right off the bat, you're going to notice that the cutscenes for this one, I'm getting 30 frames per second, which is double the frames that I was getting on the RG40XXH. I'm currently using the RG40XXH to play Pokemon Heart Gold. Honestly, the screen's pretty small, so it does require some hotkeys to switch from each screen, but honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Both these devices play Nintendo DS very well. And in fact, with MuOS, the emulator it uses, you can actually boost the CPU on the device, which is really cool. With the bigger screen on the TrimUI Smart Pro, it actually is decent to have both screens on at one time without having to switch. And the built-in functionality of the FN key on the TrimUI Smart Pro to set as a performance enhancer really makes this an awesome device. Now, as I close this out, we're going to have both devices playing Stardew Valley, kind of going back and forth between the two just to see how they run. All in all, I think you can't go wrong with either device. Both devices work well for what they can do, and both devices are great handhelds to have. Originally, when I bought both of them, I was debating with myself which one I should keep and I should return, but honestly, I think they both serve specific purposes that will allow me to keep them both. And plus, at the price point that I got them at, I basically paid less than 120 bucks for two devices. So really cool. In my opinion, I think the RG40XXH is really good for the Nintendo line of games. We're talking NES, SNES, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and some N64 it does work well with. Once we get into the PSPs and the Sega Saturns, it does have its issues in running those smoothly. But like I said, it's a great device and it's an awesome retro gaming handheld. But for the price point, the functionality, and just the overall look of the device, I honestly think you can't go wrong with the TrimUI Smart Pro. There's been a resurgence of this device in the last few months, especially with the announcement of some of the new devices Anbernic has come out with, where they're not really upgrading any of the hardware in terms of performance. I highly recommend the TrimUI Smart Pro, specifically for those gamers who really just want to game and not have to worry about settings and custom firmwares and all this stuff. It's pretty usable out of the box, and honestly, installing CrossMix OS on the device was really just a matter of copying over files. I really love this device, and I can't wait to finish Heart Gold on my RG40XXH so I can start playing more on this TrimUI Smart Pro. Now, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave questions in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them for you. I'm hoping to do pretty quickly a how-to on MuOS on the RG40XXH and a how-to on CrossMix on the TrimUI Smart Pro. Stay tuned for my RG35XX video, which should be coming out soon. A thing to note here is a lot of these Anbernic devices, especially in the XX realm, are pretty much the same hardware. So I can play my Nintendo DS games on the 35XX. In fact, I started my Heart Gold on that device. And then when I got the 40XXH, I just transferred the saves over and started playing on that. Because it's a little bit of a bigger screen. It's handheld, horizontal. Much better, easier way to play. So just bear that in mind with Anbernic. It's kind of a bait and switch. Yes, they're upgrading your device and screens and all that stuff, but the hardware is essentially the same on all of those devices. I appreciate the love and support you guys have been showing me on the channel. The views on these channels are a little bit of a surprise considering that it's just gaming devices, but I really do appreciate it. And if there's any suggestions of videos you'd like to see on the channel, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's get gaming.